Alright friends, you've seen the title, you've seen the thumbnail, and you know the drill. Today we're talking about some of my favourite books, or some books that I really loved, and we're going to have a little route through Goodreads and see what people said in their 1-star reviews about them. So let's get cracking. The first book that came to mind was Tin Man by Sarah Winman, a really tender book about two friends and their relationship as they move from childhood through to adulthood. There's a lot of talk about truth and beauty, and it's a queer novel, and it's just so lovely and has often been cited by me as my favourite book of all time. So let's have a little route. Nick says, DNF at 50%. Sometimes I start a book which completely halts my joy of reading, and this was one of those books. And Nick, it's taken me 3 weeks to read 100 pages. That's how boring this book was to me. What a depressing plot that tries to serve melancholy nostalgia but has no reprieve or joy. Well Nick, that's pretty much a description of my favourite kind of book. Each to their own. Alright Lydia, okay. Don't let the wonderful synopsis of this book fool you. It is horrendous. The writing format is so weird. It's like she's trying to be artsy but just makes it hard to follow, and it takes away from any story this book may have. There's absolutely no plot, and it's just sad for the sake of being sad. It's less than 200 pages, but it felt like it took me 7,000 years to read. Lydia, you must be very old. How can a book that's basically a novella be both boring and confusing? This book does it. Okay. And Joni, I knew someone was going to eventually come for this. What is it with authors who choose to not use quotation marks in dialogue? Is it so difficult to follow standard English conventions? This is a contribution to the demise of the English language. A little bit dramatic. This was one of the most boring books I've ever attempted to read. I read 30% of it and then decided that there are too many good books out there to spend my time on this one. I'd actually give it 0 stars if I could figure out how to. Well, if you had given it 0 stars, Joni, I wouldn't have found it for this video. And next up then is another book that I have cited as one of my favourite books, of course, and that is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I have heard all of the criticisms of this book and I take them on board, but I don't necessarily agree. It's a very long novel about 4 men who meet in college, and it's about the rest of their lives and their relationships with each other, and it focuses kind of primarily on one of their lives more so than all of the others, and he has had a very tough life and continues to have a very difficult life. That is a very broad explanation of what this book is about. So Estelle says, brace yourself for the most melodramatic, pretentious, dull, dumb, overwritten, repetitive, laughable, cringe-inducing, self-indulgent, unbelievable, stereotypical, voyeuristic, contrived piece of fiction. I'm just going to stall you there, girl. I don't like people using the word dumb as an insult. It's very ableist to look into that. After pushing through and trying to motivate myself to finish this book just to see if there's more to it or some kind of message there, I'm putting this book down for good. 90% in. Normally I would have kept going just to find out what happens to the characters, but honestly I care so little about any of them. They can all die or live. They just remain empty caricatures to me, and I have better things to read. At least it was so over the top, it gave me a good laugh every now and then. I don't think Estelle is okay if she's laughing at A Little Life. Pause review. In all capitals. DNF'd at Don't Ask. I broke at some point close to the end and kicked it across the lounge, and it's now my 2-year-old's plaything, and good riddance. Mostly without punctuation. Speranza didn't come to play, says A Little Trife. I'm sorry, Hanya Yanagihara. I'm so sorry. I'm very sorry. I am so very sorry, but I think this book is a joke. I don't know how you managed, but more than 700 pages filled with pedophilia, rape, abuse, excruciating pain, death, and whatnot made me ... laugh. Another one. And I don't consider myself a pervert. Well, Speranza, many people might. And one more then. Sarah says, I only finished this book, so I could say with full confidence that I would never recommend this book to anyone. Well, Sarah committed to the bait. Next up then, I'm going to have a little gawk through 1-star reviews for Pachinko. So Pachinko is a multi-generational family saga following a Korean family and initially our main character moves from Korea to Japan and our story kind of goes from there. Okay, so Chelsea says, okay, what's everyone talking about? This is not an epic, beautiful tale of a wonderful family's trials or whatever. It's a long, poorly written story of a family's sex life. Alright, girl. Alright. Seriously, like every chapter talks about someone getting aroused or sleeping with someone. Even as Lee describes a new character, she has to state whether the person is sexy or not. Well, Chelsea, some people would say that that's important information. And it's nearly always vulgar. She rarely just says they made love. Instead, she uses crass language even for a loving married couple and even in the narration. So I would never describe this book as beautiful, and the omniscient narration gives you random insight into minor characters that never show up again. So you're never sure who to pay attention to as you are reading. I would argue that you should probably pay attention to everybody that's in the book if the author has written about them, but okay. So Ilsa says, I don't understand the praise. I found it bland and charmless. The story is the eternal one of the outsider, the immigrant, the occupied. Others have done this so much better. Don't waste you time. I never waste me time. And Bruno comes to say, I'm a sucker for a good chunky family saga to chew on. Same girl. But here the characters were absolutely flat, the writing style was bland and simplistic, and the frequent time jumps tiresome. The deaths excite no emotion whatsoever. A character will suddenly disappear and the only mention will be after X died. The first 150 pages were entertaining, though considerably predictable, but sadly it goes downhill from there. It reads like a cheap soap opera filled with illegitimate sons, deaths, suicides, and hunger. Do you know what, Bruno? I feel like you've thought about this and I'm okay with what you're saying. I'm okay with it. Next then we're going to talk about one of my favourite books. It's an Irish novel and it's by an author called Claire Keegan, and this book is called Foster, and it is essentially about a young girl who is sent to live with some distant family members that she doesn't know as her parents prepare to have yet another baby. It's very slow, it's very short, and it's very much about the characters more so than any plot. So Nina says, I've lately seen this book everywhere. It is short, so I decided to read it to see what it's about. It has raving reviews. Nina's isn't raving. I was unimpressed and marked it with only 1 star because this is one of those type of books that we had to read in school with lots of ambiguous meanings which should blow readers' minds, but I just got annoyed. Okay, Nina. Ali P then says, absolute nothing of a book. My heart. A girl goes to live with a couple where she collects the mail. That is true. A few months later, she's going back home and is all of a sudden bereft at leaving the couple. She must love collecting their mail. You're not wrong. And then Lucy says, there's got to be bad books for good ones to exist, I guess. Next one then we're coming for another Irish novel, and this one I know is very divisive. We have Marmite in a book here, and that book of course is Normal People by Sally Rooney. If you don't know what this book is about at this stage, you probably don't want to know, so I'm not going to go there. So Marta the Bookslayer says, I think she's about to slay one of my favourite books. I checked 3 times to see if there was something wrong with my Kindle copy, only to find out that leaving out quotation marks was intentional. Absolutely unforgivable. Ella says, thank God it's finally over. And Betty says, oh look, another bunch of self-absorbed idiots who were never taught to communicate. We're in Ireland. If you knew what it was like to live in Ireland, you'd understand that it's very realistic. And Leslie says, please let me know when something happens. Look lads, absolutely no shade, but I feel like some people should be reading thrillers rather than reading character-driven literary novels. But anyway, and then another book that is one of my favourite books of all time is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. And here we follow Theo Decker, a young boy who survives something really traumatic and ends up having to live his life without his mum. And it's just very good. It's very long. There's a lot going on in there. Mark says, for this, a Pulitzer? Come on. Donna Tartt equal, this is controversial, slightly better than Dan Brown. Here's her tell. Most of the philosophy, the message if you will, which is how Tartt earns her slightly better, I think, underlying the tedious, poorly paced plot and flabby prose, comes at the end of the book where the wisdom, you know, the message is sigh, yes I have to say it this way, oh Mark, told and not shown. If by told we mean spraying a gusher of half-assed poetic platitudes in the general direction of this reader's numbed mind. I'm glad I don't have to read any books written by Mark because I think his review is more confusing than the book itself. Anyway, Jean says, do not read if you value any iota of your time on earth. UGH. So the next book didn't land on one of my favourite books of all times, but it was definitely one of my favourite reads of 2023, and that was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. It's very much a literary sci-fi, and it's a bit of a pandemic story, and I feel like if I'd known that going in, I probably wouldn't have read it because we're all a bit pandemicked out, I think, having just lived through one and currently living through it. Yeah, I'm just really glad I did. So Joe says, in all capitals, superficial. Tracy follows that up with, I've really tried with this book, seriously, I'm a 50 page to grab me or bin it type person, and I've plodded on to over 160 pages in the hope of finding something, anything that I can connect to or that gets my attention. A character, the general story, the writing, anything, but there is nothing. Tracy, again, I wonder if you should just be reading more plot-based books than literary kind of character-based books. Absolutely no shade for me, but sometimes I think people are just picking up the wrong books and then slaying them because they picked up the wrong book. The next person says, yet another winning formula writing. Total and utter bullshit. Okay, so another book that I really loved in 2023 was a book called Panenka by Ronan Hessian. It's a lovely short book about a man who is in his middle age and he's sort of was estranged from his family but is kind of coming back in contact with them, has a better relationship with them now, and it's very much a literary kind of slow-paced small town story, and it's absolutely beautifully written. And I sort of agree with what Victoria says. It's painfully ordinary. It's definitely ordinary, but I think that's where it has its charm. Cheyenne wrote, literally whatever. And Jess said, and I really disagree, Jess, waste of time. Wasted so much of her time she couldn't even be bothered to put in a full stop. Okay, next up then was a bit of a literary sci-fi that I read last year, and that was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone. And this book is again very divisive, and it's one that I get. It's not what you expect when you go into it. I remember myself feeling a little bit, wait, what? As I was reading it, and then I looked up like, am I supposed to know what's going on? And apparently no, I wasn't. So then I kind of settled into it, and it turns out I absolutely loved it, but it's not for everybody. Aaron wrote, me. No one can ever make a story about two genetically engineered super soldiers fighting a time travel war boring. El Matar and Gladstone, hold our pretentious beverage. I gave him that. I'm going to give him that. Okay, Anna, this is metaphor hell. It sounded like I just ran some text through Google Translate and got back a bunch of gibberish. It's not gibberish. It is confusing though. Matt's review. The book is called This Is How You Lose the Time War, but it should be renamed This Is How You Lose My Interest. Okay, Matt, I can't argue with any of these really. I can definitely see why this book is so divisive. And Jordan says, and I'm very on board with this book humbled me. Okay, The Night Watch then by Sarah Waters is the next book I'm going to talk about, and this is one of my favourite books of all time. So this is a literary queer novel set around the time of World War II in the UK, and we follow a bunch of different characters, and it's written in reverse chronological order, which I think is really effective, and it's just a really beautifully written, beautifully told story. Wrote very slow. Go read a thriller, love. Kelsey says, I cannot put into words how much I truly and deeply despise this book. If I could put one book and one book only on a hate list, it would be this book. If you want no plot and no well laid out and thoughtful storyline, sure, read this book. Otherwise, don't even touch it. Reading the title was a waste of time, let alone all 500 pages of it. Sorry, I had to speed up there because there was no punctuation. I also think it's interesting when people are slating books. So they go on the internet and they absolutely trash books, but they can't use a full stop themselves. I'm like, you know, alright. And Ray just says, I was disappointed in this one, which I do absolutely get from her 1-star review. Right lads, I'm gonna leave it at that. Thankfully my heart isn't too broken after all of that. I thought it was gonna be a bit rougher, but we did okay. Yeah, that was an interesting experiment. I feel like it's very important to immerse ourselves not just in the bubble of people who agree with us, but also to have dialogue with people who actively disagree with us, not to cause fights, but just to get other people's perspectives. But honestly lads, I'm gonna say to most of these reviews, they're wrong, and you should probably read all of these books if you like character-driven, literary-based books. So that's that. Thank you so much as ever for watching. If you want to see more from me, don't forget to subscribe, and let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, and indeed let me know what some of your favourite books are, because I'm always open to recommendations. Thanks again for watching, pals. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye bye.